Welcome back into another episode of the Spaceman 2.0 Phoenix Truth Rising show, the best history lesson and spiritual insights on the planet, here to help you grow in the knowledge and wisdom of truth, and the truth will set you free. The exposure of the Illuminati's plan of world conquest is the death knell to the New World Order. So in this episode, we're going to finish off the last paragraph from the last chapter and start on with the drug trade and the CIA and some of the true history of that. And then we'll get back on into the 3 days of darkness and what the elites planned for us with that and why they are planning with all the military exercises to keep us locked down and all that stuff is maybe for this catastrophe that can happen, this cataclysm that can happen that creates a lot of havoc, and people are going in confusion and they're getting us prepared for that. So with that being said, let's get back on into the best history lesson through the Phoenix Journals. Get yours today. Scroll down below. Get one in your hands. Get three actually for the same price. To ship out one is the same to ship out three. So 60% of that fee goes to shipping as well, just so you know. Get one in your hand. There's a limited amount. These are the divine instructions from the hosts of heaven to the remnant that are here to rebuild and reclaim the planet as the true landmass of the Creator for his people. And with that being said, let's get back on into the Divine Plan, Volume 1. Let him who has eyes to see, see, and him who has ears to hear, hear. Is this upcoming null time in the photon belt these days of purification? Well, it certainly will seem like it to you in the experience. Cellas, it matters not if you are prepared. All will make this passage at any rate, be it sooner or later, all. I suggest you all stop throwing stones at bringers of truth and get with the program. If you read something twice, as you must to have personal knowledge of any duplication, then you must surely understand the value of the information, or do you? Why do you study such works and words, be it for truth or the game of catcha and discountcha? What are you trying to prove? Why? You are either for me or against me, saith the Lord. Amen. Seems to me that you have blundered around in total darkness for some generations now. Is it not about time to walk again within the light? Ponder it. HATONN to clear, please. Chapter 15, recording number 1, HATONN, Thursday, June 18th, 1992, 7:44 a.m., year 5, day 307. San Luis Obispo Connection. The following series of informative reprints are from a well-known personage among groups who have investigated and researched for truth and who has published much information. He has published information which has jeopardized his life on many occasions, which indicates that all of you need the information. He has sent a packet of information which needs to be brought to your attention again. His outlay is a bit different in both presentation and in some details. I honor this person and respect his research. He has given permission that we may utilize any and all of the documents in any way we find fit and suitable. I thank him for his gracious willingness to share. I do not yet, however, have permission to call attention to this person by name, so only refer to him at this time as RR. I further use the term him as generic reference. I offer the reprinted information as given without more than cursory input. I have no wish nor intent to slash and cut another's work, so, as is our practice, information is given as nearly in full as possible and with no changes in content. If I comment as we move along, then I indicate as much. Therefore, I require that you be in the balancing of the information with that which you already have, and then I suggest you get your hands on back journals, such as Spacegate, Skeletons in the Closet, Blood and Ashes, End of the Masquerade, The Dark Charade, and in addition, all of the Tangled Web series. If you don't have the information, backup, and confirmation, you aren't going to know what hit you, beloved friends. The Tangled Web series is all about the CIA and their entanglements with the drug trade and everything else going on. You must understand further that there is massive confrontation among and between factions of this new global conspiracy, which only vies for top position. The goals are the same. So we'll get into those other books and other journals, another day. Quote, the SLO connection, #1 in series. Don't believe one word of this. Look it up yourself. If you have a brain, you can figure it out. Permission granted to copy any part of this book. RR. During the 1950s, while the United States was fighting a war in Korea, the French were fighting a war in French Indochina, Vietnam. Although the reason for the U.S. involvement in Korea was somewhat obscure, the French were very sure of their reason for being in Indochina. It was the same reason the British had spent the previous 100 years there, to control the opium production. The United States financed the French war. Why? For a piece of the action, heroin. In 1954, with the help of the CIA, the Vietnamese defeated the French and the Americans took over. In the 15 years following, 58,000 Americans died there. Hundreds are still in prison there to hide the U.S. heroin business. A nation betrayed by Colonel Bo Gritz. HATONN. Please, readers, take note that even the Soviets now admit they still have POWs from World War II right in Russian territory. What think you about Korea and Vietnam, as I have told you over and over again? The French connection of heroin into the United States was as follows. From Indochina, the opium went to Marseille, France, where it was processed into heroin. From Marseille, it came to America through several channels. The U.S. military, Cuba under control of Batista, the Mafia, and Resorts International, the Bahamas. See the U.S. Senate report on terrorism and narcotics, which tells how U.S. ambassadors, one from San Luis Obispo, shut down an investigation of corrupt Bahamian officials involved in drug trafficking and involved with prominent Americans in Florida. G.H.W. Bush Drug CZAR. Another channel was through the offshore oil drilling platform in the Gulf of Mexico. The drugs were offloaded from fishing boats far out at sea. From these platforms, the drugs came ashore via the normal crew and equipment boats, thereby avoiding detection. This first came to light during the Kennedy assassination investigation of Louisiana District Attorney Jim Garrison. Other investigators and writers on the Kennedy assassination confirmed that the platforms were being used to smuggle drugs. These oil drilling platforms were pioneered and owned by a Houston, Texas-based oil company known as ZAPATA Offshore Oil. The president and chief executive officer of ZAPATA Oil was George Herbert Walker Bush. In 1976, as director of Central Intelligence, George Bush was head of the world's largest drug trafficking organization. See the Christic Institute lawsuit and Colonel Bo Gritz tapes, the My Brussels Research Center, The Politics of Heroin by Professor Alfred McCoy, The Crimes of Patriots by Jonathan Quitney, H. Ross Perot, Barbara Honegger, October Surprise, Richard Brendick, David Emery of Radio Free America, Abby Hoffman, John Judge, William Cooper, and many others, including Senator Kerry's U.S. Senate Subcommittee report on terrorism and narcotics. North San Luis Obispo politicians have traditionally been elected on tickets promoting unlimited growth and unlimited real estate development. HATONN. San Luis Obispo is in the geographic location of Santa Barbara. One outstanding reason for offering your readers this information is that the same group is integrally involved in the very property in confiscation by the RTC and priorly by Santa Barbara Savings, etc. of this scribe. The dirty politics has seeped into every judicial branch and legal group in the state, but most corrupt are the counties in which these individuals set up criminal operations. This is why I have told you that you will find this particular piece of property has ones all the way to the presidency involved in the criminal actions. But this holds true for every state and county in the Union. Don't be fooled because you live in the boonies somewhere and think yourself safe and secure. Tehachapi is the boonies and yet has as corrupt politics and power brokers as any place in California. This is why much of our building and projects will need also begun in Nevada and then in this place. We have months upon months to allow for the power line to give approval to even the least of these projects. In some instances, however, the projects are similar to that which is already present on property, so we hope to cut some of the ribbons in advance. Okay, continuing on. In San Luis Obispo, Jerry Defenderfer and Bill Coy received large contributions from Los Angeles Realty Political Action Committees, PAC. Cattle Business Political Action Committees donated more to Coy's campaign than to any other candidate in California, including Duke Majian, governor. Other North County politicians, such as Carol Hallett, we shall present further information regarding her, and William P. Clark, very important character, who was Ronald Reagan's national security advisor and his Secretary of the Interior, have close ties to the cattle business and the cattle political action committees. ZAPATA, offshore oil, cattle, drugs. Where do these cattle packs get their enormous amounts of cash to buy politicians? Take the ZAPATA Cattle Company, for example. Yes, that's right, ZAPATA. The same name and the same affiliations to the previously mentioned Zapata Offshore Oil of Houston, Texas, previously owned by our favorite drug czar and President of the United States of America, George Herbert Walker Bush. The Zapata Cattle Company has for many years imported large amounts of cattle from Mexico. If you remember your high school biology, you will recall that cows have 4 stomachs. That's 4 stomachs. Hey, why not? If humans can smuggle drugs inside their bodies, why not cows? A cow must have 20 times the capacity of a human. Not only that, but the tractor-trailer rigs used to transport them had secret built-in compartments. In his book, The Underground Empire, author James Mills stated that the border customs agents received $10,000 every time they flagged through a drug truck without stopping it for inspections. HATONN. Besides, the trucks themselves and the shipping companies belong directly to these same individuals, utilizing well-orchestrated corporations in Nevada. Continuing on. Real estate development and construction is the classic way of laundering drug money. One of the silent partners in the San Luis Obispo cattle business is Ronald Reagan. HATONN. It is further the same group of cattle boys and real estate developers, S&L criminals, etc., which provided Reagan with cover for his Bel Air estate, and thus and so, through Nevada corporations, as a thank you, old buddy. Continuing on. Name, Zapata. Note, Zapata is a name for locations off Texas and Florida, which fit well with the oil company, but the name Zapata was chosen by the Bush cartel because it came from George Bush's old club cult at Yale, the Skull and Bones. The skull in point is reported to be the skull of the Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata. Emiliano Zapata, This may well be correct, for one thing that has the Native Americans totally beside themselves in anger is that the same Skull and Bones Club has Chief Geronimo's skull, having been stolen by a group of club members headed by Prescott Dad Bush. Further, 3 ships belonging to Zapata Oil, which were used to run guns to Fidel Castro and drugs into the U.S., were named the Houston, the Zapata, and the Barbara J. HATONN. Readers, we covered all this in detail in a journal. I can only ask that you catch up your lessons, and that simply requires reading and studying the back journals, for I know no other resource wherein you can get it all. That's right, the Phoenix Journal. Scroll down below. Get yours today. Coincidences, connections, questions. William Clark's liaison officer, Carol Hallett, was appointed as ambassador to the Bahamas. The purpose of this was to shut down a drug investigation of corrupt Bahamian officials and to protect their American partners in Florida. One of these Americans was the president's son, Jeb Bush. Senate Subcommittee reporter Kerry, Christic Institute, etc. Jeb Bush was also the North American connection to Manuel Noriega. The Cthulhu Affidavit by Paul Neri, A Nation Betrayed by Colonel Bo Gritz, etc., and Stephen Carr, deceased by way of murder. The route went from Bogota and Medellin, Colombia, to Albrook Air Force Base in Panama, where the drug aircraft were met by Noriega. Another transshipment point was John Hall's Ranch in Costa Rica. Frontline PBS, West 57th Street, CBS, Judy Woodruff, Jane Wallace, Leslie Cockburn, Mike Tolliver, Gary Betzner, George Morales, plus most of the references listed on page 1, Richard Bernecki stated on Larry King Live CNN that he also flew these drug planes, but his connection was Donald Craig, Bush's national security advisor. The destination of some of these drug shipments was Homestead Air Force Base in Florida. HATONN. This is completely covered in a journal also. And see reference list at end of chapter. And if you want to get the movie, watch American Made with Tom Cruise. Has to do with Barry Seal and Oliver North, and running drugs and guns for the Iron Contra affairs back in the 80s then, I believe. The man who could identify Jeb Bush as Noriega's connection was Stephen Carr. Stephen Carr was murdered in Los Angeles, allegedly by one Mike Decker, who worked for Cecilia Falcone, the Tijuana drug boss. Cecilia Falcone was the largest supplier of drugs for Southern California, except for maybe Air America and the U.S. Air Force. Journal's Tangled Web series. We'll get to that another day. We got some years to go. Cecilia Falcone used the motorcycle gangs and Roger Fry as a distributing network. Mike Decker was their chief mechanic. HATONN. Do you think it's simply coincidental that Malcolm Forbes played around with Liz and the motorcycle gangs for the total fun of it? End quoting. The Underground Empire by James Mills. The Azalone brothers and Jerry Schlesinger of Long Beach and Los Osos were the San Luis Obispo affiliates. The Sweet Springs Bar in Los Ojos was a distributing station, and the Anzalone Ranch in Santa Margarita was a cocaine processing factory. Several local people connected with this operation died from accidents or suicides. When the Sweet Springs Tavern got busted for drug trafficking, the Anzalones went to Club Fed at Lompoc for a short vacation. Jerry Anzalone got out the hard way on a gurney covered with a sheet. Diarrhea of the mouth can often be fatal. Ronnie built a house on 3rd Street in Baywood, complete with an iron spike fence, closed-circuit surveillance television, and a gun in every room. Several months ago, the house was destroyed by fire. Jerry Schlesinger came out of all this smelling like a rose. It pays to have friends in high places. Ask ex-supervisor Bill Coy. He always seemed to have a good relationship with the mayor of Los Ojos, California. Scott Alexander was not so fortunate. Scott, who claimed to have had law enforcement experience, military police, Arizona State Police, was helping a federal agent, DEA, Michael Francis Avez, gather information for the above-mentioned drug bust. Evidently, Scott did his job too well and found out too much. His body was found by the creek on the M.V. Rodriguez Ranch on Highway 41 just outside of Morro Bay, California. He was suicided with a very short 12-gauge shotgun, one barrel or both. Mike Avez disappeared shortly after the big drug bust and Scott's death. He was in Florida. Coincidence? New Jersey and Fresno, California. He was allegedly drying out in a sanitarium. He made several quiet trips back to Los Ojos, where he visited Anzalone Sweet Springs. Mike took the ultra-short 12-gauge away from Scott because it was illegal, but gave it back to him the day before Scott died. Where is Mike now? Neil McCree and the Last Voyage of the Janet Lee is another interesting part of this snake pit without its bottom. The boat, Janet Lee, and its cargo of cocaine was returning from a business trip to Central America. See above paragraph 2. The boat went into Vandenberg Air Force Base, and Neil left Vandenberg in a body bag. No one seems to know what happened to the cocaine. Neil's widow, Janet, became very wealthy and became Janet Schlesinger. Interesting. Maybe one could ask a couple of persons named Carnahan and Brandenburg who could explain it all quite appropriately if you could find them. This last paragraph is not the end of this report. This report is just the tip of the iceberg. Interested parties should start their own investigation and interrogate the following local citizens. Start with bartenders, building contractors, dopers, sheriffs, deputies, county officials, especially building and planners, country supervisors, especially ex-supervisors, judges, especially including ex-judges. Check and see how many local citizens went to Washington and Ronald Reagan and left Washington embarrassed, disgraced, or with dirty hands. The following list of persons could supply plenty of information if they were so inclined. Ronnie Anzalone, Jerry Schlesinger and Janet, Eddie Haworth, Deputy Mike Sheridan, Deputy Chuck Graves, George Jacobson, Carnahan, Brandenburg, Mike Radin, Kathy Hodges, Al Switzer, county employees, Gibson and Milne, county supervisors, including past supervisors, Coy and Defender, for judges, including ex-judge William Clark. Clark, as Reagan's national security advisor, rapidly left Washington and disappeared in obscurity in Ireland just after the Korean Airlines 007 fiasco. There are others, but this will give investigators a good start. Dharma, let us close this portion. We're going to confuse you greatly, editors, but we are going to be writing on 3 subjects, but all interconnected simultaneously. I must ask you to label the references accordingly. It is time I stop threatening and get on with Bush and the CIA, and that will take many writings. I also wish to next write on the divine plan, for I believe we were into the end.